There is an urgent need to act, to foster harmony and tear down the structures that are built on one dominating the other. These structures were built by humans, and we have the power to change them. This belief is what Right Livelihood laureates work towards every day, showing that it is possible to build a different human story, community by community.
Welcome to the interview series How to Mobilise Change. My name is Parisa Amiri, and during these 4 30-minute interviews, we will take a deep dive into the engaging stories of this year's Right Livelihood laureates. It is my honor to introduce the activists protecting environmental and human rights. Please welcome Phyllis Omido. What led you to become a land and environment defender?
Actually, what led me to become an LED is the effect that I saw a community suffer because of compromise on the right to a clean and healthy environment. I was very naive, I would say, when I began. I did not believe that anyone would allow such a thing to happen knowingly. And the more I persisted, believing that any sane person would see it my way, the more I realized that it was not so easy. So in 2009, a government licensed smelter opened its doors in the Ubunahuru community of 3,000 residents, 800 of which were children. And I was one of the workers that was employed in the smelter. And I worked there for about 3 months, a bit less than 3 months. And very early on, I realized that there was a lot of lack of transparency and lack of information about the actual activities of the smelter and its impact both to the smelter workers, the community, and the environment. And so, sadly, shortly into my work, my son also got affected. And when I tested his blood, he tested positive for lead poisoning. I decided to test 10 more children from the nearby community. All 10 tested positive for lead poisoning. So I felt that it proved my point that something was wrong and needed to be done by especially the state agencies. But unfortunately, I learned that it was not so easy. It was not quite as easy as I thought. And that started my journey in this case.
So on your own initiative, you tested their blood and your own. But what kind of symptoms did you have?
Right, so my son had very high fevers. His eyes were constantly watering. He had, to a point, he had constant diarrhea that was not stopping. And when they tested his blood for, tropical diseases like malaria, typhoid, HIV, things that children are tested for at that age, everything was turning negative. But the doctors could see that he had very elevated white blood cells, meaning his body was fighting an infection of some sort, but they didn't know what it was. Surprisingly, actually, is a friend of mine who worked within the state agencies in government who visited me in hospital. And I told him we were unable to diagnose what was wrong with my son. And he asked me, have you tried testing for lead poisoning? And that's the first time that it actually hit me that he might have had lead poisoning. And true to it, at that time there was no facility to test in Kenya, so we were sending the blood to South Africa. And then the results would come back after a few days. And his blood tested positive for lead poisoning. Yeah, that's when I decided to test 10 more children just to see whether what I suspected was true. And all 10 of them tested positive. After speaking to experts about it, I was given two options. One was that I have to remove the community from that area. The second was that I had to remove the smelter from that area. So the doctor said I had to remove the source of exposure to lead for the community. And so I was left with only one choice. I had to remove the smelter in order to protect the people. And that's how we started this movement, mobilizing the community, talking to them, teaching them about both the environment and human rights, teaching them about access to information, trying to find where their rights had been violated in terms of setting up the smelter. And that is where we realized there was a big problem because the state agencies were very reluctant to take our views. They put the burden on us to prove that we were actually poisoned. I remember the very first letters that the National Environmental Management Authority wrote to me was actually a threat. They threatened to sue me. They said that I was making all this up and there was no proof that anyone had been affected. Luckily, this forms part of the documents that we presented as our proof in court that they were negligent in protecting the rights of the Uinohuru community. So it has been a struggle since then. In 2016, we put up a case in court, in the Environment and Land Court, and we won the case against 8 state agencies and 2 non-state agencies, where the community was awarded 12 million US dollars as compensation and 7 million US dollars for cleanup of the community to restore it to what it was. Unfortunately, shortly after, 2 state agencies appealed against that decision at the Court of Appeal. The liability had been, at the Environment and Land Court, the liability had been put 60% on the state agencies and 40% on the 2 non-state agencies, the corporation. One was an Indian company, one was a local Kenyan company. At the Court of Appeal, we were given 50-50. 50% liability to government and 50% liability to the non-state agencies. Unfortunately, the Court of Appeal did not handle the issue of quantum of compensation. How much was the community to be given? And so it left us right back where we started. We had meetings with the community and our legal team, and we decided that the best way forward was to proceed to the Supreme Court. By the time we got to the Supreme Court, we found that 2 state agencies again had appealed at the Supreme Court against our 50-50. So that is where the Uinohuru case stands. And unfortunately, it's not just for the Uinohuru community. It's many communities in Africa and around the world that are struggling to protect their right to a clean and healthy environment. And by that right, many other rights like a right to health, a right to their socioeconomic livelihoods, rights to keep their way of life. It's many communities, not just the Uinohuru community. We have raised the bar in terms of challenging the responsibility of the state towards protecting the rights of our community, especially the right to a clean and healthy environment. Because before it was, we were treated as though it was none of government's business what was happening in the community. The fact that children were being exposed, the fact that children were dying, mothers were miscarrying, was treated as if it had nothing to do with government. But from the initial judgment that came out at the Environment and Land Court, which gave 60% liability to government, that showed that the government had the responsibility to protect the rights of the Uinohuru community. And the same thing at the Court of Appeal, even though they did not give us the compensation, but they gave 50% liability still to the state, meaning the responsibility of the state still remains that they have to protect the people's rights to their way of life, to a clean and healthy environment, to right to health and all that. The situation by 2014 was terrible in the community. The sicknesses were worse. Many kids were losing their lives. So we went through the East African community where we banned the export of lead and lead alloys from East Africa. And this is how we managed to shut down not only metal refinery, we had three similar smelters in similar situations, poor neighborhoods in Mombasa, which were shut down, and 14 others from other places around Kenya.
Incredible. And the lead poisoning and your son, what can you tell us about that today?
So lead poisoning is a lifelong disease. It's a chemical disease. Unfortunately, the worst of its effects is that it knocks out the children's IQs. So if the Unohuru community children were to grow up to become doctors, and they would never achieve that because then their IQs have been knocked off by lead. But also there is, kidney diseases, liver failure for those that had very high lead levels and did not have any access to medication all through that time. Of course, their own bodies will try to get rid of that heavy metal. Lead is one of the heaviest metals we have. So when your body tries to excrete that, it damages some of your organs. So much as my son has to live with this lifelong, he's a silent boy because of this. He takes time to talk, to respond. It's something that he knows he has to live with for the rest of his life. But I keep telling him that he's one of the lucky ones because many of the children in Oinohuru did not make it. Many of them died, and some still live with, lifelong liver failure, kidney damages, and things like that.
Has there been moments when you considered giving up?
Of course, numerous times. Um, the first time I was arrested, I had never been arrested. I had been an upstanding citizen until I decided to start speaking out against lead poisoning. At that time, it stressed out my family. The fact that they saw me on TV early morning being thrown into the back of the police truck and with handcuffs, that really affected them. I remember my grandmother calling and saying, "You come back home. You have to leave Mombasa and come back up country. I'll take care of you. You don't need to be there." So it at that time it was quite stressful. I remember there was a family meeting and they told me, "You either stop or we take your son away from you because you can't expose him to such activities." So at that time, of course, I considered. Also, there's a time I got home with my son in the evening and there were gunmen at the door waiting to shoot me. Luckily, I think Mother Nature was looking out for me, and one of my neighbors came in and his flashlights for his car just shone upon me at that time, and that's how those men didn't manage to kill me. I had to move from Mombasa at that time. Moved to a different town where I am now in Kilifi County because I realized that it was not safe for me. Shortly after that, I was, of course, arrested and arraigned in court again on charges of inciting violence and illegal gathering. So those trying moments sometimes have made me think that maybe I should stop and pursue my career in business. But I guess that fire, once it starts burning in you, you can't stop.
What motivated you to keep going, or how do you try to motivate you?
There is a lot that motivates me on a day-to-day basis. For example, when we managed to shut down the smelter in 2014, that gave us such impetus to just keep going, to just keep moving, because up until that time, we had only been losing, we were being arrested. We were not winning in any way. But then in 2014, we managed to shut this thing down. And after it was shut down, both the Senate and Parliament came to the ground and said, yes, this thing will remain shut down. It's not going to be opened, and we are going to shut down all the other smelters across the country. That, of course, encouraged us. It was a little win, but really encouraged us. Also, you see, like when we won the court case, it had been a long time, but when we went to court and the judge says, I find that you have a case and that your community deserves to be compensated, and we acknowledge that their rights were violated. That really motivated me. That really motivated not just me, but also the community members. You know, it gave them so much hope.
And how did it feel then to receive the Right Livelihood Award?
It came at a time when we really needed a breath of fresh air. We had we had been going through a lot. We had just started this campaign against a nuclear power plant that had been brought to Kilifi County, where our offices are actually. And we felt like from the onset, the community was not involved. It was like the Winohuru community case was just recreating itself, but in a different community. There was no access to information. The community did not know what was going on. They were not advised. The location that had been earmarked for the smelter was a very sensitive ecological place between a marine park where they have dolphins and other marine life, and one of the oldest forests in Kenya, the Sokoke Arabuko forest. And we felt like this decision was not the best, especially looking at the kind of location that they chose. So we had just started working around that place, and surprisingly, we believed that we had outgrown, that harassment that we faced years ago. But we found that even in this new community, we faced the same thing. The police raided our meetings, forcefully dispersed us, and we were facing the exact same challenges that we had faced in Uhuru.
Do you consider yourself an activist, a human rights defender, or just engaged citizen?
It took me quite a bit of shaking to accept that I'm an environmental activist, but these days I'm very proudly an environmental activist. Yes.
And how do you enthuse or engage others around you to take the same path?
Having lived this experience, I felt like there was need for me to mentor more land and environment defenders. So I set up a network of land and environment defenders that covers the 47 counties in Kenya and part of Uganda and Tanzania, where we mentor land and environment defenders. We train them actually and make them aware, because as I told you, I was never aware that I could be arrested for actually saying that this community's environment was being polluted. I had never imagined that that could happen. I never imagined that I would be arraigned in court and charged criminally. So I felt like there was need for us to identify and train land and environment defenders earlier on, but also to share our experiences with them and to support them through this journey so that they understand. The first time that the media wrote about me as an environmental rights activist, I vehemently opposed it. I said, "No, I'm not an activist. I am just trying to say that this community, there's something happening here that needs attention of the state agencies, but I'm not an activist." And then I kept talking, and then I was arrested, and then I was arraigned in court, and then I said, okay, now I'm an activist. We do the work we do because it's the right thing for us to do. And it's because we believe in what we do, not just for me, but all land and environment defenders that I've come across. They never pick up their work thinking, I want to do this so that I get attention from the West. No. They start working because they understand that there's something going wrong in their communities. The river is being polluted, the environment is being compromised, their way of life is changing, and they start speaking. And when people come from around the world to try and support these people, then they are labeled and try to be alienated from their communities. This is something that I would like to demystify, because for many years I worked alone without any support from anyone, just my friends. It took years before even we registered the organization Center for Justice and it took a long time again for us to begin getting partners. So land and environment defenders, their work is legitimate, their work is genuine, and they work because they want to see a better planet for all of us.
I want to turn my eye on the situation. We're here in Stockholm right now, the business center, if you may, and batteries, electric waste, all of these things polluting ground and such, they are partly from extreme consuming countries such as Sweden, as we are in now, but this has to take place in other countries. Other people's land are getting toxic from this.
So the only solution is for the public to be more aware, especially of the end use of the products, the end of life of their products. For example, the batteries that were being recycled in Uhuru, of course, they were being exported to uh, countries that have more strict environmental laws that do not allow such toxic work to happen. That's why it was being brought to Kenya, recycled, and then pure lead is exported to be used for batteries and other work in more developed countries. So what we need is just for the consumers especially to be more aware, to follow up with the corporations to understand if my battery is dead and I'm bringing it back to you, what are you going to do? Where is it going to end up? Ask the questions. Don't be oblivious, because that battery might have killed someone in Uhuru.
What kind of responsibility should then be demanded by corporations?
Corporates are quite a different ballgame to address, but I know that a lot of European corporations are trying. I know we have lobbied, for example, the battery manufacturers in Germany, and they have formed a union, and there's a regulation that monitors the end cycle of their products. So we need more corporations doing the same thing, just to ensure that you are not making profit from the death of someone else in Africa.
Your activism has extended beyond Kenya, including consultations with the United Nations. Can you tell us more about the global implications?
So in a bid to try and get more accountability, especially around the issue of used lead acid batteries in Africa, we worked on a resolution on used lead acid batteries in 2017, I think. Yeah, where we were trying to get everyone, all the member states, UN member states, responsible to commit to the fact that if the battery that you use in your country ended up harming someone in Africa, then you would be held liable for that. That is what we were trying to do through the UN. We were also trying to raise the issue around, as I've said, land and environment defenders and the risks and the threats that they face just by standing up for community rights and environmental rights. So that is how I began working with the UN. We got a watered down resolution, but we have a resolution on used lead acid batteries recycling in Africa. And we are hoping that member states can now adopt it and work with Africa to ensure that no one dies from recycling lead in Africa.
So making global change and difference.
Yes.
Yes, excellent.
Kenya is a country in the global south that is still dealing with a lot in terms of socioeconomics. We have seen countries like Japan grappling with the issue of nuclear waste and disposal. And the cost of disposing nuclear waste runs into trillions of dollars. I do not believe our country has the capacity to deal with this at all in any way. But secondly, we have so many options. There's no dark days in Kenya. There's sunny days throughout the year. We have so much resources that we can exploit that are safe for our people. There is wind, there is hydro, we have solar throughout the year. So we need to explore those first because those are sustainable for our people. The cost is manageable by our people. There's no need because they are talking now of 500 billion US dollars that the taxpayer has to come up with to put up a nuclear power plant. We don't know because we've seen the case in Finland where the cost doubled beyond what they had projected. This is not something that Kenya can deal with at this time, especially when the whole country is grappling with social economic issues, high taxes, a lot of international debt that the country is dealing with. It is not the right time to tell our people that we should invest in nuclear energy. Further, I have said that the location that has been chosen for the nuclear power plant cannot work. It is between uh, uh, a marine park and a forest. The cost were there to be a nuclear spill would be devastating to our people. It would destroy it would be quite a big loss to not only nature, uh, to our people, but globally, because those sites are visited by tourists, they are visited by researchers. They are, in fact, it's a UNESCO biosphere area. It has been put under the UNESCO biosphere just to show how sensitive that ecosystem is. There are a lot of endangered species, both in marine life and in the Arabuko-Sokoke forest. It is not the area that Kenya should choose for a marine park, for
So,
a nuclear power
so
plant.
is it mainly an issue for you of how it would affect that particular area and the investment cost, or anything else that also concerns you?
As I've said, it's not right for our country right now. We have so many other options that are cleaner. They are cheaper for our people. They are more sustainable. I do not believe the narrative that a nuclear power plant is green energy, because they are using uranium. It is being mined. We don't know where it's being mined, possibly in Africa. We don't know what conditions under which it's being mined. Of course, there's carbon emissions at that point. We are also not addressing the issue of the nuclear waste, the disposal of nuclear waste. The fact that we are passing that burden to the future generations. Why should we be storing our waste for the next 1,000 years for my daughter to come and deal with? I don't think that is a good decision for us as parents to make for this generation. We have seen a lot of greenwashing coming from the West, from the global North, terming nuclear energy as clean energy and all that. But we need to challenge those narratives. What about especially the uranium? Where are they getting it? And the nuclear waste, where are they dumping it? And if it's a case where we are doing this because we do not have to deal with the waste and we can just keep it there for the next generation, then we should not support it. I'll just encourage environmental rights defenders to keep challenging that narrative. Nuclear is not good for anyone.